private education, literacy, probably the two biggest educational debates kind of all wrapped into one. I love that you're kind of taking that on, but um, how and when does an interest in literacy become like a passion for literacy? And I guess what have you learned to change in developing your own practice?
Yeah, and I think it like if I tell you this story, it kind of encompasses where I've come to the private school as well. And I think with many people and educators included, it comes from personal experience, right? We
Yeah.
always make this joke that everyone thinks they know everything about education because you went to school. But for many of us educators, it does inform kind of our steps and what
Yep.
we do in our careers. So for me, the interest in literacy and I suppose alternative options in school really, and I've told this story to many people, emanates from my experience with my brother. So yes, we're born and raised in St. John, raised in Quispamsis, not far from here,
Yeah.
looking over the hill at my childhood home, and attended schools out here. I went through school, no problem. Liked school, was a little studious
Yeah.
girl, kind of that gender difference that
Yeah.
is well established. There is one there, but, very much kind of average student, enjoyed school. Then my brother came along a couple of years later, and the struggles for him started with reading.
Yeah.
And, I had a very fortunate childhood, especially, living here in Quispamsis, New Brunswick. And the one thing still that I think back on that really stained some of the years there was my brother's struggles with literacy
Okay.
and learning to read. Like it was significant.
Yeah.
It was significant stress in the home and figuring out how, my parents trying to figure out how to make things better for him and for him to learn to read, quite frankly.
Mr. Clark After Dark is also brought to you by Lexi. That's Luxy. Lexi sets the standard for modern dating that allows you to be truly aware of the intentions and background of any potential match. Swiping through different dating apps can be tiring. It can leave you with a constant feeling of disappointment after seeing the leftovers in your dating pool. With Lexi, an exclusive platform for those with high standards and boasts only a 10 to 15% acceptance rate, as well as a distinctive income verification feature if you choose to use it. You can end your search for the right dating app and start focusing on finding the right person for you instead. Download the app today to see if you qualify for a better chance at finding your person. And now, hope you guys enjoy the show. So sorry, was there an like learning disability or anything diagnosed? It was just like a general overall
Yeah,
struggle.
just general overall struggle. I do have some thoughts. Maybe we'll get to back on
Absolutely.
what maybe
Yeah.
could have been happening there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so my mom, kind of tells the story that thankfully his teacher said he's not going to get what he needs here. Like,
Okay.
you should pursue something else.
Yeah.
There's not much different I can do for him. And obviously, this is 30 years ago. So I'm not sure
Yeah.
if I have it exactly right. But my mom does credit that teacher for saying that because, I mean, my brother didn't go back to school. She took him out and put him
Okay.
in a private school where he did learn to read within a few months. Again, that would be a great research question, but we can't go back and, I can't
Yeah.
know. I have some hypotheses around different things that might have been happening. So I think for me, definitely literacy was, it was clear to me you can learn to read. And that would
Yeah.
be a huge message I would like your audience to hear. Like 95% of children can learn to read and at grade level or, where they should be for their age and development. That there are ways to teach children who maybe need to move a little bit more. Again, that gender difference with boys. Was my brother probably sitting there and staring at the teacher for a 20-minute mini lesson and then applying what she taught him very studiously? Unlikely
Yep.
as a 5, 6, 7-year-old boy, but that hasn't changed. 5, 6, 7-year-old boys, most of them, they still can't do that. And so I think, yeah, a lot of it comes from that. And then, fast forward, I'm in university I went to Carleton for my undergrad and I'm in a developmental psychology course and they're showing, it was just an example, I think, to highlight something, but they're showing brain scans and they're saying this child has dyslexia and has a hard time learning to read and this one doesn't. And it's like it all came back.
Okay.
Wow. Okay, we're back to this reading piece. It's not as if, forever I was thinking about my brother's journey with reading. And of course, I was a reader and loved to read. Like we were just so different and had such a different experience. But that course I will always remember. I don't have a lot of memories of lectures at Carleton, but I remember that and thinking, that's what I want to study. I want to understand why that brain looks this way and why somebody without dyslexia looks this way. And bigger, what I wanted to investigate was then, and how can we can we fix that brain?
Yeah.
Can we change that brain so that that person can learn to read? And so that's what really put me down for my master's and doctorate studies, that road of wanting to learn everything I could about how the brain learns to read, because the brain does learn to read in a certain way. And then the applied piece where the educator comes in is then, so then how do you teach that?
Yeah.
We know this is how the brain learns. What are the strategies that best teach children to read and support their brain for reading? So in a nutshell, that's a little bit, I mean, I think it tells you, so there's a couple things in there, like they're enter a private alternative education for my brother that worked for him. So I guess that might be where I've, kind of had my eye on that, where I do think, in New Brunswick, private education isn't big. It's emerging. And I think, because I'll have parents say to me, like, why is it so hard to decide where my child goes to school? And I say, well, I think it's just we have a few choices now. When, we just didn't. We all just, you went to the school in your neighborhood, and that was great. So, yeah, I think that's where, though, my eyes were a little more on, is there something outside of the public big model that might be needed to support some children? And specifically then the reading piece was always something that I was, determined that I could do with and for children.
Awesome. Because I guess what initially kind of comes to my mind for private education is like my brother, for example, sends his kids to a private school, but it's a Christian school. So that's kind of usually more of like a belief-based kind of system, more so than I have actually like a specific learning struggle. How can I target that with a different environment, which I feel like has kind of been the origin, no pun intended, of what you're kind of trying to do. And so with developing private education here in New Brunswick, I guess like what have been some of the, like, have you received like backlash for trying to enter into this private route?
No, it's been pleasant that way, because I mean, I'll be honest with you, I struggle with that sometimes. I do support, I'm an advocate of a high quality, strong, well-funded public education system. Also an advocate of recognizing when things aren't working well. And I don't like, a blind eye to things. I'm not that type. Like I'll obsess actually over the thing that I've seen. And I always say, like, once you know, you know. We know for some children, public education isn't meeting their needs. And to me, if we know that, we have to do something about it. And so for me, and I've spoke to many teachers, public and not, who've actually said, like, we were happy you did it. Like, it's nice to have somewhere to, think that maybe a child can go and be more successful. So no, I haven't had any backlash. These are probably more my, thoughts around it. If anything, people have been very positive. I've had great conversations. Like as part of our intake process, I always want to talk to the school where children are. And sometimes they're coming from public school. And I've had great, open, honest conversations with teachers and administrators about children and what we can offer and what some of the challenges are and what the opportunities are with perhaps a change. So no, it's been good.
And so two things, especially kind of reflecting on your story with your brother there, like you're talking about gender differences. And so I think one of the main things that doesn't get talked about enough is kind of the like boys who are, it's kind of like culturally influence that they shouldn't be like good readers, or there's kind of like a nerdy, like girly connotation with that. Would you agree with that? And I guess how do you think that affected your brother? Or is that something that you see that you're trying to stay aware of in your own schools?
Yeah, I don't see it like that. I think when I talk about the gender difference, and honestly, I haven't gone down the research road in a while, so I'm a little less confident. Like when I'm confident about something, it's because I know it and I've read about it. Like the literacy, the gender differences I've looked in the past, but it hasn't been recent. But I'm talking more about, for example, with reading. We know the brain learns to read in one way. Like it's not debatable. People like to debate it. They do. They like to say, no, there's things like learning styles and multisensory learning. And those are teaching approaches, but it doesn't change the fact that the brain learns to read in one way. And it doesn't negate that it might be for one child, more engaging or fun to learn in a certain way than another way. But there really is no evidence for learning styles in that way. What I'm talking about is more the gender difference around sometimes the need to move, the attention span, and even if we don't talk about gender difference, if it's just, personalized to each child. Some children are, for example, motivated by like workbooks.
Yeah.
I was now people listening that are
It's like an accomplishment thing. Like you see, like you get it done.
walking down to Byway and buying myself a new little book, and it was beside Shoppers, and that'd be a little event, and doing my book and playing school in the basement. Like I was very much the little student.
Yeah.
But we have to recognize
Playing
that
school.
playing school. For some children, that's not motivating at all.
Yeah.
Like my son getting through a Jolly Phonics workbook, like he's not motivated to do it. He knows it's part of our routine. Where my daughter probably did Jolly Phonics books 1 and 2 4 or 5 times over.
Yeah.
She loved practicing. She loved getting her sticker.
Yeah.
So I think even if we pull back from gender difference, what we're doing at the school and trying to talk a lot about is, who is the child in front of me? What motivates them? What do they know? What do they need to know next? And what do I need to do as the teacher and the head of school with my team to make sure they get what they need? I haven't found, especially in elementary, I'm sure it shifts a little as they get older, but in our school, for certain, it's, this culture around, no, we're all learners and we're all readers, and don't really see, kind of the children shying away that way in terms of the gender difference. And I think if we can do that really well young, that can sustain itself likely. So that's more the gender difference that I'm seeing. But again, would even like to pull that back and just, difference between children.
Yeah. And so I think it's funny when we say like Jolly Phonics, and like to someone who, because even myself, I've never taught elementary or like that, but we talk about like U Fly a lot. And there's like fluency books that are specific for fluency activities. And so the science of reading is what you're talking about. And I remember from my course that usually when you go into university, you're like, oh, if these articles are more than 10 years old, then they must be outdated. But everything that we read was from the 80s. And I remember like that was the most common criticism of like people criticizing the course, and the professor was like, well, you know what? I understand what you're saying, but this has pretty much been settled. So I guess, could you walk us through maybe, like, because I guess I think of like word study, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, like those are kind of the meat and potatoes areas. But I guess initially as well, because one of the things I admire about what you have done here in New Brunswick is that with Origins, with you have the daycares and the schools.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess niece and nephew, like they're like doing activities all the time. It doesn't seem like, okay, you drop them off, someone cares for them, they go home. Like they're actually learning still. So what things can parents do, or like what should they look for in kind of pre-education, so before even going into kindergarten, to kind of prepare their children potentially to weed out potential reading issues or not, but I guess to prepare them as a learner.
Yeah. And great point. And you'll notice in my speaking, when I speak about our childcare centers, that I never use the term daycare.
Yes.
Early learning and childcare. And it is a mouthful. I mean, it's natural to me now. I understand why people use daycare, and sometimes I'll be talking to people and they'll be, do you mean daycare?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you can call it that.
Well, we call it baby school.
Well, from a young age, my children, we're going to school, and for me, it was that it's important. It's something that we do. It's a program. I talk to a lot of parents who are maybe going out for a second maternity leave and who aren't sure whether their preschooler should stay in. I feel guilty, maybe, and I do encourage people to think that they're in a program. It is an early learning program. So early learning and childcare is it is the precursor to school. So that's where a lot of my advocacy work with both the community and the government of New Brunswick is in things like you're saying, like we can do early screening. You can do screening at 4 years old, 3-4 years old around language, literacy, numeracy. And it doesn't mean rote testing children. It means cuddling up in the cozy corner with a book and doing some dialogic reading with them, which is like interactive reading, so you're not just reading the story, but you're asking them questions. Lucas, there's the L like in your name. Can you see one anywhere else on the page? So you're starting to see about their alphabet recognition. You're playing with words, like there's some rhyming words, sometimes there's better books to use than other. If I really want to know what a child's phonemic awareness is and where they're at and their rhyming abilities, I'm gonna grab what was the book I was looking at yesterday? The Lady and the Fly. forget that there was an old lady who, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's a rhyming book, and it just lends itself a little easier to do those things with children. But I do tell parents you can do anything with any book or any written material. You can grab, on Saturday mornings, I don't even know if they still come, but, flyers, and you can look through those, look at the print, look at the print that's there, and explicitly bring children's attention to the fact that the print underneath the toy that you're looking at tells us its name. This is, I don't know.
Understanding like where to find information too.
Yeah. It's thinking, a tip to parents of young children would be, especially with literacy, remembering that they don't discern between the pictures and the images, or the images and the words, on their own. To them, it looks all like one picture. So it's being very explicit. Oh, I'm going to read you the title of this book. The title's right here. Do you see these? These are letters. This says the Gruffalo. And here's the Gruffalo here. I bet this is him. But when we read the words in the story, it's going to help us learn if this is the Gruffalo or maybe his name's something else. It's really like, as an adult, having to go back in your mind, because, reading is so foundational to what most of us do, that it's for parents to like go back and remember, okay, this just looks like one big picture to her. And the opportunities when you're driving, when you're out in the community with environmental print, and looking at the Staples sign, and there's a in your name too, there's a name in Staples. So there is a lot we can do in early learning and childcare centers, and as you've mentioned, we do at Origins, and that's the piece that really excited me coming to the sector, to the early learning and childcare field, was getting to children before they go to school. That real early intervention lens, because I know and believe we can do way more in terms of preparing children for school. And it's not about school readiness. It's not about schoolifying our centers. It's, if you do these things in playful ways.
That's the thing, they're playing.
Yeah, their interest, and that's how we do everything. And they do have those interests. And, sometimes there's a little bit of I'm going to miss the word, but there'll be an accusation, I suppose, of, pushing down the curriculum, or that it's not developmentally appropriate, or if the child's not interested, then you shouldn't bring it up. But, my argument back is, if you don't bring it to a child's attention, how do they necessarily know they're interested? If anyone had never put a violin in my hands, or I hadn't had the opportunity to explore strings through school, which was a fabulous program, I wouldn't have known that I, would love the violin and love playing that. So I think there's huge opportunity for us to do a lot more in the early years. That, everybody throughout education and the Department of Education has their hands full. Certainly as an organization with Origins, I'm just going ahead and doing it. But we're doing the best we can, integrating things like Jolly Phonics into there is a provincial curriculum framework I have to follow, but it's a framework. So it's very fluid and open. And as long as you're integrating things that align with the values of that framework, we've had great success both with children and the families.
Yeah, because I think that's honestly, for the most part, curriculum, generally speaking, is like a framework. Like, you don't have to, again, it's a curriculum as document versus curriculum as thing that you kind of play with as you go as an educator. And so this kind of just sprung to mind while you were talking, because one thing I've always wondered about is it's always felt arbitrary that like school starts at 5 or like kindergarten is just like, then we call it a different thing for 1 year as kindergarten, then you go into grade school. So I guess, do you think looking forward is does public education become like from age like 18 months to 18? Is that something that like, or do you think it actually is better served with kind of an not necessarily an entrepreneurial fix, or if fix is the right word, like, I guess, is it smart to invest more in those 3 years? Because even what you were saying about, because one of the conversations that we have as our family, because obviously I have a family connection with the early learning and childcare center, is that okay? And where it's like, it almost kind of like you see them relating to their peers, you're kind of picking up on things a bit more than you would as like, oh, than if like you had your friend or someone in the community that or the neighborhood that does daycare throughout the day. And in a sense, because I'm not a parent yet, even though it's kind of out now. We're now 3 months pregnant with our first one, so it's soft.
Are we on childcare list?
Well, I'm looking at it ASAP. Yeah, it's funny that I invited you on here in December, and Yes, but I guess to me, like no parents prepared for the diagnosis of an LD or like potentially like an autism diagnosis because that can I'm not an expert by any means in that realm of like the signs of how that can come up.
Right.
But it seems to me that being in a more so of a learning environment does kind of potentially ease that blow. Whereas like you have your kid kind of going for 4 years, and then all of a sudden in kindergarten, then they're different.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think that to me kind of plays into that. But yeah, I guess what are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly, I am not an advocate for, the early years being taken over by the public education
Yes.
system. I mean, certainly at this point, I
Mhm.
think, again, to my note earlier, we got our hands full. There's a lot of
Yep,
things
there's
to
already
figure
a
out.
lot of issues.
And I think, like, let's get that sorted first. Alongside that, I think we do have a strong early learning and childcare system, and you do have operators and educators who are educated, who have experience in this very niche time. Concern when things become systems is that there is a lot of systems and procedures and policies, and it often takes away the ability to personalize, to really look at this child and this family and what they need. And that's what we do really well. And so what I would like to see is us working alongside education a lot closer. Some years ago, well, since I came to the field in 2018, and I think right around that time, the Early Learning and Childcare Division, was brought to education. But previously, we were social development, which was, I'm in between where we should have maybe stayed or if education was the best place for us. But, we're at education.
Yeah.
What I think is nice there, it signals that we are part of an education system, that
Yeah.
early learning and childcare isn't daycare, for
Yeah.
example. But I would love to see, and I know the Department of Education would too. I work closely with their deputy minister and a lot of people on their team. We all have dreams where we want things to go, right? But
Yeah.
again, there's a lot to do.
Yeah.
But we would like to see us working more closely together. Things like, and I did put a call out when the new government was sworn in around the screening, like looking at children's language literacy and math, like as child
Like the psych ed lists are like 2 years long. That's one thing that's like I'm learning more about because again, kind of I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but
that's okay.
being from like a grade 11, 12, like you're dealing with the end when you're trying to get kids through graduation. It's a very different world from
Right.
like but at that point they have their IPPs or they have their codes
Right.
or et cetera. Like most of them have had enough time to kind of go through the system. Then you see kids now who are in like grade 6 and 7. They're like, oh, they've been on a waiting list for 3 years.
Right.
So that's kind of the craze. But yeah, so go ahead
Right.
with the screen.
Well, and I think so that's our opportunity is screening is about catching things before they become an issue,
Yeah.
right? And it's not always, it might be especially at 4, you might kind of be seeing something and going, okay, that child, they've been introduced to these letters, say in my program since they were 2. And now we're in the second part of the year and they're 4 and really have no idea what these letters are.
Yeah.
And, for me, it's incumbent on me to tell someone, especially when children are moving from my center and I have the ability to do programming for them and they're going to go to another kindergarten program, that we share that information. To me, it's just, why wouldn't we?
Yes.
And getting those balls rolling earlier because there are wait lists for those types of things. And, I think if I can segue a little bit into our school, that was part of my impetus for the school as well, was seeing children in preschool in my programs. We have over 170 4-year-old preschoolers in my organization this year. So there's enough of them that, between honestly, sometimes I'd be worried for certain children and thinking like, how are they going to fare and are their needs going to be met? Are they going to still get to play and be outside, what I believe and thought that they needed? But then it was also that, in the early years, we're planting all these seeds and we're doing all these things with children, but we don't get to see a lot of it actually flourish. Like we're germinating a lot of things. And so selfishly, I suppose it was a little bit of like, I want to see this child become a reader. I know she can do it. And she's, maybe she's at the top of the class and very interested. And I just would like to see a part of it. So there was part of that with the school too, was this, I suppose, a little bit of a seamless education model that we're piloting there. We have many, many children in our school who've been with us since they were infants, since they were 12 months old.
Fair, yeah.
So like, what does that continuity and care and approach to early education look like for their elementary education? So those are little kind of side things that I'm looking at as the years go by. We're in our 5th school year this year.
Okay.
So not a ton of data, but we're rolling and being able to follow some children that way has been interesting.
And so did this originally start as like the early learning and childcare and then went into the school? 'Cause I know you have a few facilities here that you're kind of overseeing.
Yeah, so I will share that. So I have 5 separate campuses for natural learning childcare, which includes 8 distinct actually buildings, because on some of the campuses we have a few buildings. But yes, the core of our operation is childcare. The school came actually during COVID. There was the school closures in March, if I'm not mistaken. School didn't go back that year. But childcare opened. I think we were closed for 9 weeks. So, May or so, we're welcoming children back, including school-age children, because I do have a couple of after-school programs. Quickly, we said, well, we need to bridge this school closure, and we can. I have the education. I have people on my team who have the education. And so we started with like literacy and math enrichment programs for the children who were coming to us anyway. It was like, well, let's do a little more with and for them. And honestly, then it was just a few parents who were like, we don't want to go back necessarily in the fall. It's hard to kind of go back and remember, but it was a scary time for a lot of people with, and what was the mask mandates going to be and what were some of the requirements. So, it was kind of like, well, if we can get a group of like 15,
almost 5 years ago.
I could do this. I know.
Wow.
And so we started with 18 children, and we were kind of one-room schoolhouse at the woods. There's a building on the property that was there when we purchased it. It was the family home.
Okay.
So it was like a bungalow, so we renovated that. And we welcomed 18 children the first year. Then the next year, we built the new building that you can see from the road. And the school's in the lower level. We have 68 students this year.
Wow.
Yeah, but that is our only school. Like, that's our elementary school, is at the woods. We do have plans, and I've had lots of people asking about a school at the park. So the park is in St. John. It was the former Cherrybrook Zoo. And so, we own 20 acres there, and we've opened 2 childcare centers on that property. One this year and one late last year. There's one more to come. And in the brand new building that's being built now, there is room if we wanted to do a school there. So I'm telling families, bear with me. Definitely won't be this fall. We will get our childcare running, but then, potentially could there be another campus in St. John?
That's cool. I like that. Yeah. And so I guess kind of for whatever reason, all of my conversations come into some semblance of leadership. And I guess how have you gone about like creating a team for this? And like, I guess what would you look for in like, because again, you are the kind of head of school. You, as far as I know, like the CEO essentially of like the organization. So I guess how do you go about looking for the people that you delegate to?
For me, I do place a lot of emphasis in how people view children. It's really important to me what they say in their interviews and their writing about how they view children, how they view the adult's role in a child's life and education, how they view the environment, the role of movement and outside, and people's experience. I mean, that's a huge one when I can look and see like what people have done in the past. At our school, we, when I say school, that's the elementary school, and then I'll childcare for the childcare operations. But certainly in the school, what we've really attracted are a lot of teachers who've been teaching internationally. Yes. And so, when I look back often at their resumes and the things that they've been exposed to just from teaching internationally, the different way they do after school activities, the ways, in a lot of those cases, everybody's living on campus, or close to campus. So they're very much a community of people. And, the teachers, if you look, they're very much mostly, kind of from not wherever they're teaching. So if they're teaching in China, so they're from all over the world. So they're very much, kind of living as a community, working as a community. So I have found that to be, a very successful way in terms for the school to find teachers who want to work together, who want to be a community. We're a small school, if 68 students, right? So it's a small school, small team. And if anything, I find when things are smaller, it's even more important that everybody is on the same page and that their desires for how the school functions, how we interact with families, how the children experience their days, that, everybody's on the same page. So those are a lot of the things I look at. And then, as we know with teaching, whether we're in early years or elementary, it's in people's practice, which can be hard to kind of screen for and see. Yeah. But I think we also quickly know if something is a fit in a space or not in terms of how, again, the educator or adult interacts with children. So those are a lot of the pieces that I'm looking at.
And so have you noticed even a difficulty in like recruitment, retention in this? Because the public sector is an animal of its own, because like you're going to have, again, I've said it several times, but especially teaching back east, like I'm from Newfoundland originally. Okay. So we moved up to Fort Mac like years ago. But it was always a thing, okay, don't go into teaching because one, you'll never find employment. Two, don't even think about teaching back east because you'll sub for 10 years and then maybe finally you'll get temporary spots. That's completely shifted. And for whatever reason, I can only imagine, it seems to me to be the case that like, just no one really wants to teach public or private anymore. I haven't had that experience yet. I still love it. I still enjoy it. But I guess, has that been an issue for you, like trying to recruit at all?
No, recruitment. So retention's been great. People, stay, which has been fabulous. Certainly retention in the early years is a nut I want to crack. It is, and I think it's fairly notorious that, it's hard work, it's hard work working with 2 and 3 year olds all day. And that's part of my role is advocating for working conditions for early childhood educators. But similarly, if we get on that for teachers, I think that's why my retention has been good, why recruiting hasn't been overly difficult. Would I like to look at 20 resumes for a position? I would. I like my choices. It's not that, but we've been able to meet the needs of the growing school well. But I think it is things like working conditions. And when you say, that there's a little bit of a narrative out there that people don't want to teach, even, friends of mine and colleagues that are teachers in either system, it comes down to their working conditions, and I think, I look back and I know, probably a lot of people on my social media, Facebook and such back from high school probably think that I'm a teacher. I always was, loved school and loved teaching and, did some TA work even in university. But I knew the public education, working for that system wasn't for me. And I think back and think like, how did I know that at 20? And there was probably other things that influenced that then. But I look now and go, it wouldn't have benefited. I want to talk to people like you, and I know you speak to teachers, and but there is a little bit of a veil around, like how much you can say, and I find those things difficult because I'm the type that wants to write it out, talk it out, strategize for solutions, and that can't always happen privately, in my opinion. Sometimes there has to be some public dialogue around those things to move things. But I think it is working conditions, and I back to that story. If I even think personally, like to always have to work 5 days a week and not be able to take my daughter to the orthodontist or, and that's the reality, and I feel like, and I could be wrong, I feel like that has gotten worse over the years, that there's a lot less wiggle room for educators to get out of the classroom for things they need to do. I could be wrong. That is an outsider looking in. I'm mindful of that with my teams, that there is flexibility, that, you don't only have to go away at March break. There's going to be a better deal in February. Take that time. We'll cover it. I never want to compare what, and thank you haven't asked me to do that because it's just simply very different. Again, obviously very small. We do a full year, school year, so children come in the summer as well. Now, many children don't. It's very flexible to what the families need, but it is an opportunity for enrichment, whether it's a child who wants to fly with their math or a child that we're still wanting to, get to a certain point for the next school year. But that also means it's flexible for our teachers. So some of them may want to work some mornings because they have these 4 students that, they want to get to a certain part by September, or often things that you want to have done with your students during the year, but it's so busy, So our students love chess and Lego, and so
chess, I like that.
Yeah, like having a chess club, and so even in the summer, it's been, what? I'm going to twice a week, I'm going to do chess club. We're going to get this rolling. It's a little less stress in the summer. As I mentioned, not all of our students come. It is flexible to our parents and what they need. It's not how we describe the summer term. It's not, it's not new learning. Children are learning all the time, but it's not new content, I suppose. We're reviewing content. We're going back to projects and initiatives.
A bit more fun with the games because they actually already.
And we're outside the whole time. I mean, it's at the woods. We're on 12 acres there. Summer in New Brunswick is usually pretty beautiful. So it's pretty idyllic up there. And they're outside and doing those pieces. But again, just to say that it's, I think the retention and the recruitment and, some of those, how are we doing those pieces? It is really around those working conditions and what we can offer that. And a lot of it comes down to the flexibility.
And sorry, I'm kind of like chuckling to myself here because it sounds like everything that you've kind of wanted to embody in like your philosophical approach to this school is like what everyone still has resistance to in the public system. Like if I take a class outside, it's like, why is Clark going outside? Like what, he's not teaching his students. He's not in the classroom. And so I guess like why?
And why?
Why? I just don't understand why there's so much like.
I know. And I know. It's, like I'll even say, like, I would say to you if you were on our team, like, okay, what did we just have? Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
It was on a Friday, so maybe not so bad. But we celebrated it on a Thursday. The public school had a snow day that day, but we don't have our snow day. So most of our kids were there on Thursday because some of our children were going to Poli on Friday. Yeah. So we celebrated Thursday. So for example, I would say, now, we do say no candy.
Okay.
Doesn't always happen. Yeah. And it's just excitement. Young children, it doesn't take much. Valentine's Day is exciting. Yeah. They're exchanging Valentines. They brought little trinkets for each other. Yeah. I will say to my team on Friday, or especially the day after Halloween, don't beat your head against the wall. Go for the hike. Go outside. Abandon your plans for that day. Yeah. Just be with these children. Enjoy the time. They're young children. I think, if I could share that message, especially about elementary school, but I am sure there's middle school and high school teachers who this probably applies. They are children. It is their childhood. I don't think there's a problem with leaning into some of those fun times and not expecting from yourself as a teacher or from the children that things are going to be a certain way just because, no, today is Monday and it's a school day. But last night was Halloween.
Yeah.
That's my approach with my team.
Life too. Like I don't eat candy all the time, but yesterday was Halloween, so I'm gonna eat 9 Kit Kat bars tonight and whatever.
You're not feeling well, us adults, we're teachers are adults and humans too, or you didn't sleep well because the kids didn't sleep well. And, but it's a beautiful spring day.
Yeah.
Go outside, go get that fresh air, take care of yourself. I believe firmly, and a business partner of mine uses it with me all the time that, I'll get the analogy wrong, but it's about putting your oxygen mask on first, that you have to take care of yourself first. So even if we speak to our teachers, right? Teachers have to take care of themselves first if they're going to serve these classrooms of children well. And I think just keeping that at the forefront of our mind, and, whether you're the classroom teacher, the administrator, the policymaker, that, and I sometimes think we really do miss that. Like in all the narrative and rhetoric about school and missed days and attendance. Yeah. But These are people, and we say that in our organization all the time. I can try to checklist the crap out of something and procedures and policies, and you have those things, but you have to make room for the fact that these are people who also have a life outside of work. And that, school, when you're a teacher, is your work. It doesn't need or maybe should be your whole life. You want to give and do your very best. Anyway, I could go on and on about those things, but I think, those are some of the pieces that are challenging in lots of organizations, but certainly in education as well.
And so I'm gonna put on my government cap here. No shade, no that's what I'm looking for. No shade intended. I guess I think outdoor learning is becoming very popular and more so a part of the curriculum now. I know that in Alberta, outdoor learning was kind of meshed in with the Indigenous studies programs. I don't necessarily see the need for being outside necessarily also an Indigenous kind of intertwinement. Not that it shouldn't be either.
Right.
But I guess I'm wondering, what are the things that are good for learning? I guess obviously you don't want, if I work for you as a teacher and I'm just taking my kids outside every single day all the time, I guess what is the benefit, do you think, that's not necessarily obvious but kind of can be planned for outdoor learning?
There's a couple ways to look at it and a couple ways we look at it. So again, Origins Academy is at the Woods. That's on 12 acres. So for a lot of families, that's, the appeal, right? Is that we call it nature-based learning. So, and we have a very blended approach, in terms of I'm looking at all the snow outside and it's been bitterly cold, our children still would go outside every day. So there's none of this never outside. You just had to dress for it. But are they spending, the 5-6 hours outside that they do in the spring and summer? No. But there's a couple ways you can look at outside learning. So one piece is there is a lot that can be done outside, know. Why not do your math lesson outside? Why do you need plastic counters and not the rocks that the children can go search? Why do you have to make your 10 frames from laminated sheets when you can use sticks to do that? When we're thinking again about young children and trying to engage and excite them, likely what's more exciting are the rocks and the sticks, Unless you're a little Erin and I did not like math. So that would have been the good example. I remember, I always make this example. We have the 10 frames in the unit, gosh, I don't even know what they're called. The math, manipulatives that are the 5s and the 1s and the 10s. I still, every time I see them, I think when those used to come out in elementary school, I was like, well, I'm doomed. I have no idea what those things mean, and never figured it out. Sorry, teachers. I'm sure lots of people tried to help me. But, it's, why not do that outside? And for us, again, it comes a lot up in the spring, you see those kids looking outside and finally it's warm and finally they don't have to wear their winter gear. And so for us, it's more, again, my analogy, maybe it's not the greatest one about banging your head against the wall. Why would you? Okay, we'll go outside. We're going to go outside for our math class. Let's go. Let's get our things. You're going to need to collect these things. It's more work, in a way, because, you could just hand out your 10 frames versus, okay, now I got to give them 10 minutes to go find proper sticks for 10 frames. Yeah, they might, kind of get at each other with the sticks and, pretend they're swords and all those things. But, you go through those routines just like you would with anything with children. What the expectation of that time is. So there's that, there's kind of why not? Why not do your reading buddies outside? There's just a lot of easy things to do outside. The other piece that I have found to be immensely positive and rewarding for children is the natural regulation factors of being outside. So think of that fresh air, of being able to sit in a hammock, and our children mostly use hammocks as swings, but to be able to swing back and forth. So that's that. The
kids are always kind of
there is a word for it, but I'm going to probably say it wrong. Proprioceptive, or there's input there. There's sensory input that children are getting from being outside, from having the classroom without walls, from being able to, in our case, we'll say, okay, we're going to meet closer to the cottage. There's a building that the children affectionately call the cottage. So, run your guts out till you get to that cottage, and you can keep coming back and forth until I get to the cottage, and then we're going to start our math lesson, right? Some children just need that degree of movement, of fresh air, of not feeling like, I've had a child tell me they feel like the walls are coming in on them sometimes. Take them outside. They don't have those things. I've, children who are, maybe like when I was a child, who are very attentive, who love school, who would sit and listen to the teacher for 30 minutes and not budge. It benefits them as well. I've seen them do just as well outside. Just because they're using rocks for their math manipulative doesn't mean they're not still advanced in their math. So there's those pieces. And I do want to speak to the piece about the Indigenous, because we're about actually this summer to bring in the Canadian Nature and Child and Nature Alliance, I might have it mixed up, are bringing a forest school practitioner course to the woods for my teachers. And I thought it was interesting, just when you brought that up, a key part of their program is you have to find an Indigenous community to partner, to come welcome, whether it's a smudge ceremony, whether it's, more of us thanking them with a gift of tobacco. But it is a requirement of this training, is that you have that partnership and I suppose blessing of the community. And really just coming back from, all this land is Indigenous land. And if we're going to create forest schools and nature-based schools and say that we're teaching children about the land and how we teach the land, that it's just integrated with Indigenous teachings, and that we have to have that respect there. So that is a piece we every September 30th, we have had events at the woods, actually. So we have some good relationships with Indigenous communities and elders. The Honorable Greg Nicholas has come to our school twice, which is fabulous. So we have some connections there, but we're really looking forward to deepening those connections in terms of what it means for the children being on the land, learning with the land, so that, I think it's all integrated, but that's kind of, and that you brought that up is a big piece around learning outside. So I think there's levels, it can be as superficial as we went outside and read at the picnic tables today, or it can be as embedded as the children recognize, the different species and including Indigenous species of plants that may be on the property.
Yeah, because I love that, because I do think I just never understood like why those two were kind of made to be one, and that's why anyway. But yeah, I do think that it just feels like as you're talking, you're able to, and maybe it's as a smaller organization than like a public system, you're able to kind of create deeper roots with the community and like have more continuity for the kids. And it also seems like the full year, because again, I mean, I like a summer off as much as anyone, but also I really don't, because I've taught summer school each year, and then I've also done like, I do like EF travel groups and stuff that I'm doing it next summer and stuff as well. But to me, like, I don't necessarily see a problem with getting rid of like the full year system. But and then it's also weird because teachers are like, oh, I only teach because I want the summer off. Like, that's also weird. So I don't.
Will say, most teachers, when I talk about the summer, because even international, that's not overly popular. Like, they're typically off for the
Actually
summer.
that common, like outside of North America.
No. So, and so I'll be honest, I'm always a little bit nervous to bring it up, because it might be this teacher I really, really want to join my team. And a lot of our teachers are off for the summer. Like, it just depends on who the students are and what our needs are. But when I recruit someone, that does have to be, it can't be that any one person on the team is just not here at that time. I just don't feel like that is fair, although sometimes it works out that way. But again, I still remember one of our teachers with us, and she said, well, yeah, but if I get to do this and I get to do this, and it's, it's not as structured, and I can still have 3 weeks off and go to, the beach with my children as we always do. Great.
Like for me, 2 weeks, then I start getting antsy, and then I'm like, you know what, I need to, and especially if you have the flexibility to go outside with your students. Like, it's not, I feel like already it's happening where teachers are like, oh, only 4 more months till summer. I'm like, I hate that, like thinking like I can't go there, or like you're always backwards designing yourself to the next break. That to me just feels claustrophobic and in a different kind
it's
of
not
sense.
ideal. I think, one thing, and again, beauty of a small school and I suppose the decision maker right in your school, like we don't have to ask anyone else. Like we're already reflecting on, January and February are long. I know there's March break. And I think that's what a lot of us shoot for. And we do a 2-week March break, but it's still, I'm already like thinking like, but is there a better way is there even just a long weekend maybe that needs to be inserted at the end of January or something? I look for other models, and my daughter actually is at RNS, and they did a long weekend in January. And this is what kind of piqued my interest, because at first I thought, that's interesting. They just got back. But then when it came, she needed it. Like I thought, okay, no, we all forget that January can be the longest month ever, followed up by February. So it was, just something to, again, like, who does it serve?
Yeah.
As we kind of were chatting before we started, things that don't serve me. And like, does it serve everyone to just be grinding until March break? Is there not something we can do in there to make it, feel a little bit better?
Yeah, because I understand the intent of the academic calendar, especially for high schools. Like, you have your 2 semesters and you kind of go through that. But again, entertaining, I think, different models of structuring the year, I think, is something not talked about enough. And I feel like we have so many issues with our system, which obviously is a generic thing to say, but like, we also aren't really trying that many new things, right? So I don't necessarily see the.
When I lived in Ottawa, I did my undergrad at Carleton, as I mentioned, and there was a school, I think it was the Ottawa Catholic School Board. They were piloting a year-long school calendar. And make note that every year-long schedule I know, you still get the same amount of weeks off. They're just dispersed differently, right? So when you think about that, giving up my summer, it's like, no, there is 2 weeks at March break. There's a third week in December. Like there's different ways that they break that out. I did look it up a few years ago when I was planning on our school, and I thought it was interesting. I think, if I remember correctly, they did adopt it. One of the key research, and the reason I knew about it is I think one of my professors was kind of part of the research team. Interestingly, one thing they found is that academic outcomes were not necessarily higher when they adopted that. What was through the roof was teacher satisfaction with their job.
Wow.
So to me, that's worth it.
That's a surprising, I guess, against the grain of what's kind of traditionally been happening.
But I think it goes back to, and I think more and more with, certainly maybe my generation and younger, we want the flexibility. I want to be able to take the long weekend, or I don't want to pay the high prices at March and travel with everybody else at March break. And so I think, being able to, have that flexibility there is where, they've seen some of those impacts. So yeah, that's not, if people want to look it up, but that was my takeaway when I kind of looked at it a few years ago. And interesting on the academic piece, because that was it was a little disappointing for me. But at the same time, it didn't suggest that children decreased. It just didn't see this massive jump.
Well, because now that you're saying it, it almost feels like Christmas break and summer break kind of set up this like daunting path for you to go on. Because now you think like, okay, I'm only doing one thing for 4 months. Like, and that can feel understandably debilitating. Whereas like, we know we do this every year, but like other careers, like they just don't do that. No. So and so one of the other things that I have heard, I really don't know a whole lot about like the intricacies of your organization whatsoever, but even just speaking private school in general, is that for teachers, there's always like a threat, like don't go to the private sector because like you won't be treated well and like they can fire you at any moment and you'll make way less money. So I guess how would you respond to that?
I think those things are untrue. And again, I'll preface this with, I only know what I know, which really is my school. That's all I know. But I know in our case, we are very competitive with wages. And the thing with wages in any sector is people have to be compensated for their value, and the ability to grow over time. So that's always a consideration, right? Is like, how can, and a lot of that comes with compensation. So we're competitive that way. I mean, in terms of, so we're not unionized, right? So, and I think that's where this protection from the union, and, people may be saying like, they could get rid of you at any time. Yeah, it is private sector.
That's like any other, that's most of anywhere.
Yeah. And I think, really it's just looking at the organization and their history there and how they treat their people,
That's also how you stay competitive in a sense too.
Yeah.
You can't just fire everyone all the time or else no one will want to go there and then you'll go under.
And probably people that have worked in maybe, and not necessarily just because it's unionized, but in systems where maybe it's more difficult to sever a relationship if it's not working for the school or for the children or for the staff. That's not always a good thing. There's pros and cons to that. What I do talk to my team a lot about is the fact that Everything will be transparent though. So, I think there is a real maybe worry among teachers sometimes that, a student accuses you of something or a parent and all of a sudden I'm out of my job. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's where the NBTA and, that is a nice line of not defense, but
Safety.
and
Yeah.
you're going to have some support there and make sure
Yeah.
that the proper protocols and procedures are gone through. But I just say to my teams, I'm going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's not,
Which is actually more of like a trusting relationship. It's not like you're this
Right.
abstract person in a different building that you never meet either.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, again, where it's always about, our decisions always come to what's good for the child and what's good for the teacher.
Yeah.
And we meet somewhere in between there. Because sometimes things that, we want to do for the children or are needed, maybe don't work well for the teacher. And
Yeah.
how can we create the conditions that make that something that works for everyone? So yeah, I mean, in my case, that, hasn't reared its head in that way. It certainly could be perhaps a reason I'm not hearing from maybe,
Yeah.
like I said, I'd rather interview 50 than 6.
Yeah.
That could be something that is worrying people. I mean, the biggest thing I hear about are pensions, and, pensions I think are somewhat a thing of the past. So, I understand that people want to hold on to those types of benefits,
Yeah.
but it's not to say, that schools like mine don't have matching RSP programs and there's
Yeah.
other ways to compensate for those things. But it would be maybe a little scarier for.
Well, and those are pretty much the two main things of. It's kind of scary because it almost seems like the two main things that are still keeping teachers in a time of, especially like I said before, if you move to New Brunswick, like you'll never get a job. It's blah, 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 like for years. And then I'm still fairly new. Like I'm only in my 5th year kind of overall. And then I know that so many teachers I work with and in the district are still in university teaching full time. Programs are, I think, is actually sad in a sense that we have to design now the programs around them teaching full time when you're not even accredited yet technically. I understand there's a need for it, but it seems like people that are still in it, it's like, okay, well, it's pension and summer vacation. This does not feel like a recipe for success to me at all. And I don't necessarily have like a follow-up question with that, but it's daunting. I feel like, okay, like myself in 20 years, like what pieces are remaining, I guess. And that seems very.
And if they aren't the most important for you, you would then wonder, so what are the pieces or what can my employer do that is going to secure my attachment to this place? And I guess humbly, that's what I guess I'll just speak for myself, but say to the government of New Brunswick, like speak to those teachers, if the summer off and a pension, someone who's 5 years in knows that's just probably not going to be all it can be for me, then what are the other pieces aside from, of course, you're a teacher and you're interested in students and learning. But I think, again, like recognizing working conditions are really important to people. Like, and maybe increasingly so. My dad and I have these conversations. And my dad, he's 70 now. He worked for JDI for 40 years. And he is of the, kind of the opinion that you just do it, Erin.
Yeah.
Show up, put the hours in, shut up. Like, honestly, and I have mentioned to a couple of people within the government but a lot of those, that's not how a lot of us function anymore. And even in my own organization, recognizing that that's not good enough for people. And I can be stubborn and say, no, these are the shifts. This is the wage. This is how it goes. And people will churn through my organization. Or I can respond and think and offer 4-day weeks and say to people, yeah, you can switch shifts as long as you cover it. It doesn't have to be something overly, so it's like it's employers, and with public education, obviously it's government New Brunswick, but to me it's incumbent on them, like, how do you want to respond to this? And to just put our heads in the sand and say, well, no, my dad went to work every day from 7 to 6 and worked there for 40 years. Well, there's less and less of those people, and I think.
Yeah, and I guess like the controversy I'm trying to build towards, like, I guess teacher performance is a very taboo, like we don't want to go down that road, but I guess when the summer and the pension kind of becomes the primary incentive, like okay, maybe when you're in your mid 40s and now you've maxed out your salary, like you start, it's easy to stop innovating your practice or to stop thinking about like, okay, maybe my practice is the same, but the kids are different, but
Right.
I'm still going to do the same thing. And so I guess the stats I've heard, because again, New Brunswick is pretty much ranges from like 60,000 Canadian to about 105,000 as like
Mhm.
the start and end of the bracket. And or of the pay scale, I should say. But then you hear stories like, oh, like a good teacher is worth like 200,000 and like a bad one's actually only worth 30. And that's like New York Times stuff from the
Mhm.
past. But I guess how should we, if any, in any way, and if at all, like quantify teacher performance and like what do you look for? I know that's a very controversial
Yeah.
question because
Yeah.
especially in retention, because like people are showing up, so they're like, "Thank you. Like, we're not going to say anything. We're going to try and help you, obviously, and support you as much as you can."
Yeah.
But I feel like sometimes people, myself included, all the time, are like, "Please give me honest criticism." And they're like, "Oh, you're doing great," and I'm like, "Well, no, like I don't feel like I'm doing great. So
Right.
I want that, but I don't
Right.
like they think you're going to hurt feelings and stuff." So I
Right.
guess like yeah, so a couple like money questions there, but that's kind of just attached to performance. And I guess in a
Mhm.
private setting, not that you're like looking at your teachers all the time and saying, okay, like this is subtract 4,000 and add 3,
Right.
you know what I mean? But
Right.
also understanding like what is the type of individual
I think,
and
something that's kind of pinging as you're talking there, and I know this gets controversial too,
yeah,
but, we do look at student outcomes and we look at how the children are doing. And, so that's academic outcomes,
yeah,
but then there's social outcomes too. And even when I do a tour of my school, I talk about both.
yeah,
Like both have to be strong and are a focus of this place. We don't sacrifice one for the others.
yeah,
So it's not, we have these elite academic performers, but they're really unwell children because
yeah,
it's not that. It's really watching both, and it's having the conversation sometimes with the family that right now we're really going to focus on your child's social development. These are the pieces
yeah,
that, and it's not to say there's no academics, but
yeah,
I like to get on the same page with people, teachers and families included. But to your question, so we'll look at those pieces and, to make sure, I suppose, in any other position, if you're a teacher and you're tasked with teaching the children in your room to read, and if 25% of them can't read, it's not about placing fault, but it's about
yeah,
placing, okay, I need to go in and see what's happening during that literacy period. Okay, those 5 children, they don't participate every day. They're
yeah,
over playing Lego because they're so disruptive that they're allowed to do that. Now, in our model, I do support that, but what we do is we know who those children are and they get literacy later with somebody else.
yes.
Perhaps
Yeah.
over time as
Well,
children.
flexibility's pretty much been the primary theme of what you're able to
Yes.
do differently. Yeah.
Exactly. But, so maybe I make that observation. And maybe I make the observation that, the U fly lessons, we do use U fly as well, is, wow, it's cresting an hour. U fly is supposed to be
Yeah.
25, 30 minutes, but
Yeah.
that's once you're pretty proficient with it. Like
Yes.
it is longer to get started
Yeah.
for sure. But say this is middle of the school year, so you make those observations and see, you make a plan with your teacher. We have a director of curriculum instruction, and Shannon's role is to, a big part of her role is to be in classrooms alongside teachers, to be able to coach them, give them ideas. Okay, I saw they were doing the, our controlled blends, and a lot of the children in there that was going over their heads. So she'll create some resources and she'll either co-teach or go teach it or just provide the resources to the teacher. So for me, like it's looking at those outcomes. And then for me, it's and is the teacher open to that? Is this process going really nicely and they're really welcoming this support? I will say overwhelmingly at our school it is, but I mean, it's set up from the beginning that this is how we work. So the expectation is set that this is how it's going to happen. And then similarly, it's, around the social development. So, what are the friendship pieces going on in the classroom? And is this a community of learners? And are there, the kindness clubs happening after school? Is the teacher recognizing that, you got some chess fanatics in your classroom, so you really want it? Like those things are important to me too, that teachers, that they're seeing beyond just the academic and just the curriculum, because that's really what we're trying to build in that school. And and people need to be compensated for those things, and it needs to be recognized.
Yeah, because I guess and again, like it's very much going to depend on the teacher that you have in your room. Obviously, experience, relationship with over years, that's going to play a factor. And I guess like some people, like the idea of that kind of like fixed life
Right.
is very daunting as well, right?
Yeah. Well, even topping out at the 105, not that 105 isn't a good salary,
Yes,
but I mean, if you think of someone who, maybe like yourself, that is very ambitious and eager to do and think like, I guess what I would have an issue is just why at any point is it just unilaterally topping out? Like what?
Well, I've always I had the conversation yesterday about like the incentivization of higher education. Like, why is
Right.
that I can, not even me, like if someone who has a PhD, why can't I go then teach grade 3 literacy at a public elementary school, but then be compensated for having done 13 years of work versus 6? Like that to me doesn't make sense. Obviously, there's different opportunities, I think, for like district stuff. Like, you get to that road,
Right.
but like if someone, for example, said, you know what, no, like I never want to leave the K-3 classroom, but I'm going to be in school the rest of my life. But you're saying no, like
Right.
we don't value that.
Right.
That's what it's saying.
Right.
Which is
No, I agree, and that is, because you get, it often happens in like. Maybe the analogy is with like management, right? But from my understanding in public education, it's to go to district.
Yeah.
But if you're a kick-ass kindergarten teacher, we need there, and we need you to support other kindergarten teachers. And, it's like, where are those roles for people? But, so same in my organization, if I have an amazing preschool teacher, I don't want her to leave the class.
Like, I want you to do that.
I need her, but then again, on me is incumbent to think about, okay, but she has been doing this for a really long time. She's looking for a little bit more.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's traveling out to all the other preschool classrooms, being a mentor for those preschool teachers. As we get older and you think about our youngest children, I mean, we're on the floor. We're on the floor with them. And so physically, that can be harder for people. So what are it's okay. Maybe it's 4 days a week with children and 1 day of something else. So again, I think just that flexibility and creativity about how you're going to, this sounds selfish, I guess, use somebody's talents, but how when I'm looking at a teacher or educator in front of me and they're wildly talented and I want
if
to
they're
use
talented
that,
and they enjoy it, you don't want to have them build the resentment.
Right.
I think that's important. And I think that's like important in any sort of private sector stuff. But like the public sector you can feel a lot more isolated potentially in that resentment, because like all you hear is noise outside, and then you're in your room, you're like, hey, what am I actually doing?
Right.
Yeah. And so is there anything that potentially, I know we've talked some literacy stuff, but is Burns and Rowe something that you guys are using? Like the Fontes and Pinnell? Like I just know this is like a...
Is that?
Well, I just know like that's... I'm new to literacy work. Okay. And so I come in day one and they're like, we use Burns and Rowe, not Fontes and Pinnell. Fontes and Pinnell is not evidence-based, but Burns and Rowe is. Now I've been doing the Burns
and Rowe is, so I'll have to catch up.
Okay, well, it's just like...
Is it the word connections?
No, it's like a reading assessment just to see your grade level, and then your like inferencing, your detail sequencing, and like comprehension skills, essentially. And
so this is at middle school.
You can use K-12 that you can use the Burns and Rowe assessment for. There's like 3 different versions of it, but I guess that's how we have assessed students for determining like who requires extra support.
Okay.
Anyway, so I guess if anything, that's almost even cooler for me, because I guess like what is it that you kind of encourage your teachers to do to like diagnose and assess, if anything different from that?
Yeah, so we do follow like a data-driven approach to instruction and reporting for our parents. So we use the dynamic indicators of basic early literacy skills, which is highly known as DIBELS.
Love it.
So we use DIBELS as, to get these things right, as a screener.
Okay.
So there's a difference between a screener and a diagnostic.
Okay, yeah. So Burns and Rowe, I would say, I almost feel like it's the middle of those. It's almost like it gives me your like words per minute for like fluency. I see what words you're struggling on potentially while you're going through, because I'm like ticking off words as you're reading. But it's not necessarily like, okay, now I can give you like a learning disability diagnosis. It's just kind of giving me a rough indication of, you can read grade 8 level material at 130 words per minute, or you're reading grade 5 at 70 words per minute. You're getting all your words right.
You also have that level of information. So you're right. That's where it's kind of between the two.
Yeah.
Because from what I know, screener is our dibbles, and it's more, how many letter names do they know in a minute? How many letter sounds do they know in a minute? How many nonsense words can they read in a minute? So that's giving like just a quick capturing of their ability, fluency within a minute. Then if I see a child is not, because the 60 seconds, especially for our young children, that means they know it to fluency. Well, you could argue in kindergarten, there's no fluency, they're just learning their letter names, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them do know them. So letter name fluency would be one where a lot of our kindergarten children do score really well. So there it is as a screener. But for the ones that don't screen well or don't meet the benchmark on the screen, then you could use something like the quick phonics screener, QPS, which I think public system still uses. And then that digs into, okay, what letter names do they know? It's not timed. Those are the big differences I see. So those are two of the tools that we would use. And those are for decoding, which is the first kind of level of instruction in elementary, is getting the children to pick the word off the page, right? Can they read that word? And then we're moving into, it's all somewhat concurrently. I don't mean to say that they're one after another, but then you're moving more into your fluency, because until children can identify the letter name, the sound, and start blending them together, then we work on them doing that very automatically and fluently. So those would be two measures we use. We use two other measures for math, similar. One's a screener, one's a diagnostic. And in our school, I'd say the percentage is around 60% screeners, all we need to do, and then 40% we would dig in with a diagnostic to see exactly what they know and what they need to do next. And again, with Shannon's role as our director of curriculum instruction, I help her with data collection as the school has grown. Thing with data, you like to get it as quickly as possible too, right? So it's all around the same time. So her and I will kind of attack those. Sometimes even Laura, another gal on our team, will help us collect data, and then we sit down with our teachers and go through the data on where we're at, and that informs planning the next 3 or 4 weeks of what the classroom needs to look like.
Do you guys use like math running records as like a
no?
So because that's honestly, there's other internal debate about the utility of that. That's kind of one thing I've noticed that I think is starting to change in education in New Brunswick. Coming from Alberta, like we have, God bless Alberta for what it is, like for, I guess, the chain of support that's available. Like, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Anglophone district, but like I've talked about like the coaches that are available. Like at my old school of 1,600 students, we had 2 LACs, which is pretty much what a resource teacher is here. And they also taught, and they also oversaw like the entire IPP, individual program plans, a different acronym there, for the entire school. That's a lot. Very overwhelming versus now, like I'm in a school of 260 and there's 3 resource teachers at one thing. But one thing we were able to do was that, like, prior to, it's not because of me, but it's because of the existence of my position, they're like, we had like almost no data last year when it came to assessing for literacy, because I had the flexibility in this role. We assessed 170 students in like 5 weeks. And then you have it all at the beginning of the year for everyone. I guess my question is, how do you use data? And I guess, like, what is the connection between the data you find and the best practices to actually assist in like improving, I guess, the scores or the data that you've collected?
Right. I think the biggest thing we do with the data that allows teachers to adopt the practice that works best is, I'm a huge fan, and what we do is we do homogeneous groupings. So, and if you look at the evidence in the research base, it's very clear that children who are taught in homogeneous groupings fare better than children who are in heterogeneous or mixed groupings. And I think if you just think about it, off the top of your head, it makes sense, right? If you're a teacher and you're teaching, a group of even 10 children, but they all have this base, so say if phonics is just an easy one to go at, you're doing you fly, they all know lessons 1 to 35 well. They know it, and it's actually automatic. Rather than teaching a group who are all over the place between lessons 1 to 35, I think it just makes sense that that's easier as a teacher. What I say is it is easier. Teachers can do it the other way. They do it all the time, and they're scaling to all different abilities and needs and those pieces. Again, in our context where we have the flexibility, why would we not do it in the way that is easier for the teacher, that the evidence shows is better for the children? If you think about it, if you have a group of children, say 10 children, and they're all over the place, well, I mean, the risk there is you have some children who know the material.
Yeah.
Well, they're not getting anything from that lesson.
Yeah.
You have some children who are so far below that they aren't getting what you're teaching either. I mean, I know teachers know this, right? It happens every day, and sometimes there's not a way to avoid it really well. It's the composition of your classroom and the support you either have or don't. But in our case, that's how we use the data. So we create these homogeneous groupings, and sometimes it's meant we need another teacher. And we'll get another teacher. Sometimes it means I'm going to go teach that group for 6 weeks, because if we group them this way, now we have 9 groups, we only have 8 teachers, and somebody else steps in, myself in that case. Again, that's why we have the flexibility to do it, and we can be nimble that way. But that's how we use the data. And back to your piece about how does that kind of facilitate teachers' work? Well, it's more manageable because, again, they have the data and we present it very clearly. Your students know this. This is the next piece they need to get to. This might be a little bit of review you should do before you get to that next piece, but it's just very explicit and structured that way. Something I've learned in the last 5 years is literacy is very much like reading skills are from basic to more complex over time. Yeah. And the scope and sequence is very well established, and it's there. What I've come to learn over the last 5 years is that pretty much every subject matters like that. There's the most basic concepts, and they go up in complexity over time. And I use this analogy of, the foundation to a house. Yeah. But if those, if there's some foundational pieces that have cracks or children are not sure about, and when I think back to my math, the fact that, I didn't know what those 10s and 5s and 1s were. I was like, oh, no wonder, addition in my head and multiplication is still difficult. Those were cracks in my foundation. But I think what that has empowered my team with is there is a scope and sequence. We can go back, and when you're shaking your head and thinking like, why is this so hard for Erin, and why can't she learn this? And, I've done kind of all my things. And often it's really, we go back and go, there it is. She doesn't know this, and once you kind of fill that piece in. And so that's how we use data. It's very much a team. It is it's not, and I've done different things in the past. I used to collect all my data, create reports, and hand them to the teacher. That didn't work.
Well, and even
down and look at it together.
I think one thing that should potentially change is the idea of, I love that you sit with your teacher and say explicit direction that you then give the teacher the freedom to figure out how to implement. Right. And I think one thing I think being newer, and I guess the kind of no one wants to scare the teachers away because they want to retain them. The Word Connections program, I had no idea existed, but it's essentially the grade 4 to 6 version of UFly. Okay. The way it was described to me. Okay. But I was I finished all the assessments for this was in October, and I was I have no idea where to go. I have no idea where to go now. This is so new to me. I can't just go talk about communism and Karl Marx on the board. You know what I mean? There's nothing you can kind of learn while you're surviving to kind of figure out how to do it better, if that makes sense. And then our coach was you know what? I have something for you. She's just try this. And I've loved it. And the kids have loved it. And I'm but I needed that from a higher power to be okay. And then now if you want to try something else while you're doing this, you can. But you always kind of have this you know what? These are the steps. It's 40 lessons. It gets increasingly more difficult. If your kids are getting trapped at lesson 16, 17, go back to 12. Yeah. It's kind of like you fly, the lessons kind of go.
Try to figure out where they're stumbling. Oh yeah, I mean that's probably a whole other conversation. Yes. But I did my master's is in curriculum and instruction from UNB, and this isn't good. But I remember graduating and thinking I still don't know what they mean by curriculum. It's so wide open, and that's where I like seeing that a lot of schools, public and private, we are embracing programs. The fact that, teachers don't need to go home and just try to figure it out.
For the next day.
There's people doing that. Why not use the stuff that is there? And there's U-Fly, for example, coming from the University of Florida and like widely, freely available, and it's quality stuff. So, it's not always a program's going to be the answer, but certainly we do, across the content areas, there's different programs that teachers have access to.
You learn to change it up, or that works.
Right.
I feel like that's the way I view literacy instruction. I've been doing it for, again, 4 whole months here. I know it's not very long, but I guess that's
You're getting into it. But the other couple pieces about data, I will just say quickly, for me, I remember writing in my master's, it must have been thesis or something, but like was really like kind of musing around, if you're not using data, what are you using? And I still believe that. Like if you're, then you're just going on a hunch. Like, and my personality wasn't comfortable with that. And so kind of fast forward a decade, it's no surprise that, we use data quite heavily. It's a great way to track learning growth. Yes, there's benchmarks, but what we talk to our parents about is we celebrate all the growth as well. Especially in our setting, we'll have children enter our school because their parents are looking for something different, especially at the older ages. And often it has been because, they're not reading well. And it's like, my child's entering grade 4, my child's entering grade 5. Like, this can't continue. One thing I have to say about that is, we do our very best for people. But as we kind of started with, there's only so much you can get done in 1 year. There's only so much a child can learn and achieve, no matter the instruction or the time on task. But one of the big celebratory moments that we focus on then, and what is that learning growth over time? So you still might not reach that fluency benchmark, but wow, you've gone from this to this over time, and that's to be celebrated. And I think when we were saying at the beginning about the middle school piece, that was one of my things was I just, I might not be sending the child to middle school quite where they need to be in terms of what the DIBELS end of year benchmark might be for grade 5. But I want the school to know that this has been their growth so they can continue to make that growth. But they do need the instruction. And, at the time, my kind of concern or question was, will that kind of instruction continue? But I think data that way, and we freely share our data with parents. I mean, more and more we have parents who are, looking for that kind of quantitative data and looking at those pieces. And they seem to appreciate that as well. And that we can kind of track it over time. I have students who've been us K to 4 that they can see that, that data over time and how much their child has learned.
And so I won't keep you too much longer here, but on the other side of the way government kind of interacts with the private education as well as early child learning. I can't remember.
Early learning and childcare.
Early learning and childcare
is
the $10 childcare policy has been, again, from the outside looking in as a future parent, obviously sounds great that you can have childcare become more affordable. But I guess, what are, the expected and unexpected barriers of like being someone in this realm? And then I also saw you posted on LinkedIn recently about like massive jumps in like property tax, like assessment, or I guess what can you maybe potentially provide as a support and criticism of like the idea of the child care policy?
Yeah, it's what I'd like the government to recognize and acknowledge, honestly, is that it's a new space that they've put childcare operators in. In the past, 90% of childcare operators in New Brunswick, they were private, so not nonprofit, which typically are aligned with churches. Or then you have your big ones, the Boys and Girls Club and the Y. Most other examples I'm going to tell you are aligned with churches for nonprofit childcare. But in New Brunswick, historically, over 90% of childcare centers were for profit, mostly women, small business entrepreneurs providing childcare. What I'd like the province to recognize is that and the federal government, that when they brought in Canada-wide, we really lost a lot of our small business abilities. So the biggest one is they capped our fees so that parents can have an average of $10, which in New Brunswick it's 18 for a preschooler and 21 for an infant. So we're not at the 10. And I have heard, hate to break anyone in bubble who's listening, that we're not going to get to 10, that the average in New Brunswick, I think, is 13. But in doing that was the big piece, is that took away, for example, we're talking about literacy, and I really want to up the ante on my early literacy and numeracy instruction, and I want all my preschool educators to do these PLs and such. I don't have that ability to to say increase my revenue so that that's an offering that Origins has above the others.
Okay.
You know, I can do it as long
Yeah.
as I can pay for it. But in the
Yeah.
past, as small business, you make those decisions, right? Well,
Yeah.
I might increase my rates by this a little bit, but this is going to be the value that the families are going to get. They're going to make those decisions about whether they go here or they come to Origins.
Yeah.
And ideally, people are going to choose Origins because they know, you know, the staff get 12
Yeah.
hours of PL a year. But yes, that costs a little bit more. That has been taken away. Like we're really feel as childcare operators that, you know, it's really kind of maybe somewhat like the public system is they're trying to make us all the same.
Yeah.
You know, you pay the same, you get the same curriculum framework wherever you go. So those are kind of, I guess, some of the cons as operators, but that I do want families to be aware of. As operators, you know, thrilled for people for it to be more affordable, you know, like, and I don't think, you know, there was subsidies, good subsidies available before, but there still was people struggling. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, the amount of people that I've, you know, paid for their childcare because, you know, they needed it. I mean, so I would say a lot of that has taken care of itself and people are able to access childcare. Maybe if you can get in. So here's the other big con, right? There's not enough space. And in the past, say when you built a childcare center, you would put your application in. Once it was built, inspectors from the province would come, they would license you, or they would, you know, measure all your spaces, make sure you had the right materials and give you a license. Well, now you can still do that and you can charge whatever fee you want, which is kind of the old system. If you want to be in the designated system, which is the 18 or 21 a day, which all of my centers are currently because we were grandfathered when it came in, you can't get those seats now. So, you know, there's beautiful land behind you. If I wanted to build a nice center there, you know, this is an up and growing community and neighborhood. I can't get designated seats for that center. So that has really put a cramp on expansion of centers and people, you know, like yourselves being able to access childcare because we're simply not opening up more childcare. So, you know, those have been some of the more, I guess, practical pieces. And I know the province and the feds, you know, and as operators, we're all trying and working and everything takes money, a lot of money. And then that's the piece, you know, with the Canada-wide. I mean, I do applaud it. I think it's, you know, hugely important. I had written previously about high quality, accessible childcare systems, but they are expensive, you know, like to the tunes of billions of dollars. And, you know, what that's going to look like in the future too, change of federal government, I don't know. So yeah, those are some of the practical things. I've probably missed what exactly.
No, because I was just wondering, like, we talked about like property taxes in New Brunswick specifically. I know that's a New Brunswick issue. Seemingly, again, I'm new to the province here, but that seems to be collectively like probably one of the most common criticisms of the, I guess, monetary system here in New Brunswick. But again, but I guess you're kind of dealing with the $10 childcare and that.
Well, sorry, and that is where I started. Was I think the government recognizing though that then we're in a new space, you know, you're increasingly involved in now even the finances. I would say before they were not. Yes, people applied for subsidy, but it was on the parent. They had to apply for a subsidy. Like otherwise everybody paid the rates that I was charging. So there's this, you know, increasingly publicly managed right down to the fiscal part of my business. Yet because my business, you know, is zoned commercial in one instance, you know, I still pay commercial property tax. I'm still subject to rising property tax, rising everything, as is everyone. But what as operators were saying, but you've capped our fees. How's that? You can't, like, in some cases, you know, childcare centers are at risk because they can't increase their revenue yet. Price of just living, as we all know, is just rising. And so just flagging that to government, both to acknowledge that and, you know, we'd like to see some more proactive decision making around how we will be compensated. That's the issue. I mean, I'm with bated breath waiting for the budget to come. And this happens every year. Now, fairly confident, for an example, minimum wage. Minimum wage, just the increase to minimum wage would cost my company about $110,000. We don't have it. I don't have that extra amount of money. I mean, any of us that work in education, you know, it's not that there's a surplus of money sitting around. So now I have said to operators, and even feel confident saying it here with all of these people, I do believe that the government of New Brunswick knows that and they will help us, and they have in the past. But I guess alongside that, they recognize that, minimum wage, and I recognize it's important, it needs to go up, it should go higher, but in a capped fee system,
Yes.
they're going to have to support that. I would like to see them acknowledge that in other ways.
Yeah.
Interest rates,
Yeah.
like for one, like my interest rate goes up at my 4 Landing Court Center. I mean, that just comes off that extra $4,000 a month is just
Yes.
coming from, wherever, and does include things like, well, I'm going to really have to look at the classroom budgets. I'm going to have to really, and I guess deciding is that what we want to happen?
Because you want to make it more affordable without cheapening it.
Right.
I think is the goal for anything. Like it kind of goes to what you're saying about like there's other ways than just throwing money at things. Okay, yes, you could raise teacher salary another $8,000 a year, but you could also just cover the insurance. That's not adding on to salary, but it's like things like interest rates and like property tax don't completely screw us over when you're kind of saying, is it the goal to close all this down? Obviously not. So there needs to be some sort of, again, like a proactive solution there. So to kind of wrap us up here, I'm a very big quote guy. I know I might not come across as that, but it's Albert Einstein. I know, very original. It's education is what remains once one forgets everything that they learned in school. So I guess sitting across the table from you, obviously very successful in the domains that you've chosen. I guess what are some of the things that you think have helped you become successful that you would not necessarily have learned in a classroom?
Yeah, I like that quote. Because I think it speaks to, it's not necessarily the stuff we can recite or the evidence that we know about. It's more about who we become. And I think when I say that about at Origins Academy, that I talk to parents about, it's just as much about your child's well-being and their social development and who they are. We saw that through the pandemic, the well-being of people really plummeted.
Yeah.
And that really without well people, what are we as a society, as a community, as a school? And so, I think it's those pieces, it's the, kind of the hard work, keeping your nose to the ground, perseverance, persistence. I can be labeled pretty persistent. I like to say that I, in a kind way, as kind as I can, will, pick and pick and pick and pick until I get what I need, or that I know that I'm heard. I come from a very strong family of entrepreneurs, of women who've held high positions, who have done well in business and community. So my mom, and I think it's a lot of those influences with your family, how it's you just keep on. And I think one of the things I was thinking about in preparing for today is, for me, like when I talk about playing school when I was young, I actually played orphanage. I don't know if I should admit that. I don't know how I knew what an orphanage was, but it was
very different things.
With baby dolls. I had baby dolls everywhere. And my husband says, and Sean is very wise, that it's not a coincidence that I came to childcare. I had these babies in my basement for years that I was taking care of. But I think, that like that you kind of have an orienting piece. I've always been interested in children and curious about what they're thinking, how they're learning, how they're experiencing, how they're feeling, like to the point of sometimes it can be debilitating, but that's where, and my husband was the one to coach me, because prior to coming to Origins, I was the executive director of a nonprofit for literacy around the province. But again, I had lots to say, and I had a lot of questions about what I was seeing in the schools. We were like a tutoring program working alongside the schools. And he just kept encouraging me. He's just like, you got to get in the work. You got to do it. You got to do the work. And I do believe in that, It
can be daunting because you're like, in the sense, you almost kind of like the thinking.
Yes.
Then you're like, but now I got to put it on myself.
Well, there's less time for thinking when you're in the work.
That's true.
I will say that. And thank you for this opportunity today, because I find I don't get to talk about it a lot, right? Like I'm talking in my own head or to myself, but I don't get to, and that is the piece I would miss from academia at the universities, the writing and the thought, but I was ready to go and get into classrooms and see what was actually happening and what are the challenges and what are the amazing things happening that nobody's talking about too, because there is.
And I think there's the doom and gloom on the education system. Like as much as I'm saying people are only in it for the summer and the pension, that's not always the case. Like, like there's for the most part, again, those who have stuck around
Yeah.
in the past 10, 15 years are in it for the right reasons, I think.
So I think that's what, I would say. It's like maybe the capacities and the characteristics that you've acquired through schooling and education, including university, that kind of stick with you. And just, I think, being in a way an advocate, again, like I joke that I like to say a lot, but I think that's an important role for people to speak up. And I recognize that, again, like I hear all the time that a teacher can't say that or they can't talk about those things. And so at the risk of, and as you mentioned before, of being maybe labeled something or, oh, she's a little too outspoken. And those things have come my way over the years. The risk of that, I think the flip side is, I think a lot of times we can talk about, and I commend you for what you're doing, talk about and say things that people do feel. They just may not feel as comfortable talking about. And I think if you do things, maybe just to cap it off, one of the things that I learned through school and being with people is, cap it off with as being as kind and thoughtful as you can be about it. I am the first one to say, like, 100%, everything I said today could be wrong. And I will accept that. Like, I am not one. I mean, I think if you ever go through, science and data, the thing that it teaches you is you have to accept that you were wrong.
Well, like you kind of almost not want to be wrong, but it kind of starts with like the assumption that you're wrong.
Yeah.
You gotta go from there.
So I have I really genuinely, and this is, I have a hard time when people have either it's difficult them to say sorry or to accept that they said something maybe harsh or that they were wrong. Because to me, it comes like secondhand, and I think you're right. Yeah. In lots of situations, I'm good to be wrong. Like if that is not how it is or how it needs to be, great. Let's try something different.
Dr. Erin Schryer, thank you so much for coming on today.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.